This week, I am very pleased to introduce Mr. Allan Harris. This man has had a distinguished career as a jazz musician, guitarist, and songwriter. The New York Times has dubbed him the heir apparent to Nat King Cole. And after you get to know this gracious man and hear his voice, you will agree. Hello, Allan. I cannot express what an honor it is to have you as a guest today.
Rick, thank you very much, man, for having me on this interview. I feel so honored, and I'm glad you enjoy my music. I'm here in my parlor here in Harlem, and it's Sunday morning. I just want to say thank you, and let's get going.
I'd like to talk about your most recent album, The Genius of Eddie Jefferson, which you released in 2018. I found the album while browsing new releases on Amazon.com. I really liked the album cover, so I took a listen to some of the song samples, and without hesitation, I ended up ordering the album, and to this day, it remains one of my all-time favorites. Give me a little background on the album cover.
The album cover of my record, The Genius of Eddie Jefferson, it was taken from an album that he did in 1965 called The Jazz Singer with Howard McGee, James Moody, greats from Coleman Hawkins songs, which I tried to emulate. And the photographer was Sandrine Lee. She's the wife and partner of Will Lee, great jazz and R&B and funk bass player in New York and around the world. He's with the Letterman show. So we decided to go with her, and she did a wonderful job with the photography.
So tell me, what inspired you to record this album?
Well, the inspiration to record this album was always in me. Growing up as a vocalist, I knew about Moody's Mood. Sang it since I was a child. My Aunt Theodosia used to play it all the time. James Moody solo. But Eric Reed, pianist, with Marcellus with Lincoln Jazz Orchestra for a while, he said, Allan, I'm going to do a Eddie Jefferson project in the Appel Room, which is at Lincoln Center, Jazz at Lincoln Center. He said, would you like to do it? I said, sure. He gave me 10 songs to learn, which was a hell of a score. And he brought on a wonderful vocalist called Carla Cook, who grew up listening to Eddie Jefferson, and we did the show together. And I think that's what inspired me to do it. She came to me at the end of the show and said, Allan, it was really fun doing this with you. You should do a project with Eddie Jefferson and stuff. I didn't think of anything of it until years later. I started to do the songs over and over again. And in 2018, we recorded it, and here we are, The Genius of Eddie Jefferson.
I went down to Memphis 5 or 6 days ago. I went down there to lose some blues. I was feeling quite low. I met a woman there who took me everywhere, and she was mighty, mighty nice to me.
The Genius of Eddie Jefferson is chock full of great songs. One of my favorites is Memphis. What attracted you to the song? Does the song have a special meaning to you?
The song Memphis, I think, was written by Eddie Jefferson. I wanted to do the song because it reminded me of all the great blues jazz singers that came before me and I grew up on. Joe Williams, Jimmy Rushing, Big Joe Turner, Mama Thornton. And I love the way that Eddie Jefferson took those lyrics and put his little vocalese to it, going back to Memphis. It has such a groove that is it's similar to how I sing the blues. So I decided to put it on the record, and my man Eric Reed came up with this gospel sort of flavor to it, and the song has become one of my favorite songs on the record.
Can't understand what happened to all the music that was so swinging to me. Those were the days when I could shake my head and could always pat my feet. I can remember Dizzy and Bird on was making musical history. Dexter and Jug in Illinois, Bonnie Castle was screaming, Howard McGee. Man, they really, really used to turn me on. I never will forget the way that they were swinging. I started singing around by the time, cause I was full of soul, you see. Flip was a ripping and 10 out and sounding loud on the saxophone.
Dexter Digs In is a really cool song, and Willie Jones's drums are just great. But it's your vocal timing that is amazing. What do you do to prepare for recording such a complex vocal?
Willie Jones, he was on the gig with me at Lincoln Center, so he knew this material probably better than me. To prepare for this, it took basically a few months of just listening over and over again in the car, at home, looking at charts of how Eddie Jefferson did his inflections. And I tried to copy him because there was no other place to go. I love the song, the speed of it. Eric Reed, he put a little panache to it, and he drove me on. And we came up with something I think is exciting.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the musicians on the album. Eric Reed is a great pianist. What made you choose him for this album?
I don't think really I chose Eric Reed. We chose each other. We'd worked so many times together. I did a tribute to Billy Strayhorn called Love Came, and he was on it, and I loved the way he played. Plus, he comes from a strong gospel background, and Wynton picked him up when he was a teenager to play with him at Jazz at Lincoln Center, so he had a discography in his mind that was vast. I love playing with him. He knows how to work with the vocalists, and he knows how to push the band on. He's well schooled. I just like the way his flavor is.
I am most excited about saxophonist Richie Cole. Fabulous, just fantastic. He actually worked with Eddie Jefferson in the 70s and 80s. So what's the backstory here? How did Richie Cole end up on your album?
I met Richie Cole when I was living in Florida in the 90s. He used to come into O'Hara's and play with my friend Jesse Jones Jr. saxophone and Lonnie Smith on organ. He'd sit in all the time. Years later, I was doing a gig in Chicago, and he called my hotel room, and unfortunately, I couldn't hook up with him because I was just in flight. I said one day we're going to get together and do something. Because I know that years later I'd be doing a tribute to Eddie Jefferson, and lo and behold, he had spent a large part of his career with Eddie Jefferson. So he brought to the table a lot of stories, a lot of memories, and a lot of music. So that's what came about with Richie Cole.
Let's talk a little bit about your upbringing. You are Brooklyn born and Harlem raised. Were your surroundings an influence on your music?
Not just my surroundings were my influence, my family was. They came Southern folks, Exodus into Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance. My family came up there. My aunt Theodosia, my mother, Allan Harris, my aunt Kate, it was a soul food restaurant. My mother was a classical pianist. She was a prodigy, first graduating class from performing arts in New York. And so I couldn't run away from this music. My Aunt Kate's restaurant, you would sit there and you see people like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong come through, The Temptations. There was always music in my house. So I grew up with this music, and it was a natural progression for me to become the artist that I am today because of them.
Nat King Cole seems to be mentioned quite a bit when music critics describe your voice. Are you a Nat King Cole fan?
I've not met a human being in my travels around the world as an entertainer who's not a Nat King Cole fan. And I'm not late to the party either. I grew up with Nat King Cole. My family loved watching him, the first black man to have a TV show. And my Aunt Theodosia, my mother, would play his records all day long. Plus, the older I got, people say that my voice sounds like him. It's not really my voice, it's my inflection, because my family believed that in order to sing a melody, you must be able to pronounce words correctly, and I give them credit for that. So in that case, I guess Nat King Cole is my influence.
I'm really interested in your 2006 concept project, Cross That River. In many ways, this is an historical album, and I consider it to be the crowning jewel of your career. What inspired you to do this album?
The project that I have, the original project called Cross That River, comes from a childhood obsession with me, with cowboys and Indians and horses. And my grandfather had a 600-acre ranch. I used to go out there and hang out with him and see people who work with livestock and work with the agrarian lifestyle. I would come back to school in my summers to New York and tell them my adventures, and all of my teachers and friends would admonish me. They say, no, there's no black cowboys. So I think this was an outcropping of that. As I got older, my wife and I sat down and she said, why don't you just release all these pathos inside you and start writing some of your experiences? Next thing you know, I'm writing a whole musical called Cross That River, and I'm still writing it today. That's where Cross That River came from, the inspiration.
What was your main goal or message in producing this product?
One of my main goals of doing this album is to let the world know, starting with America, know that as people of color, we were more than just porters and slaves and nannies and mammies and picking cotton. We were part of a noble profession with our white counterparts, which was out west, building the West, building railroads, catching wild horses, herding cattle. And so I tried to bring that story to life and Cross That River, and it's really, really starting to gain some traction in the eyes and minds of people who hear it. This is why I wrote it. The story of Cross That River is very relevant to today, especially for people of color who have such a disconnect between what a cowboy really is. I'm not talking about someone who dressed up in a wonderful suit and rides up and down city streets like Philadelphia, Chicago, or Compton. Those aren't cowboys. Those are guys who just happen to buy some horses and ride up and down. If you know what a cowboy is, and I'm not going to get into it, just look it up. You understand what I'm saying. So it's very relevant. I think the story is trying to let young people, especially people of color, youngsters of color who've not been around horses and that, to understand what it really is to be a cowboy. It's a skilled labor that not many people could do it, not even white folks, which is why they hired us black folks to do it, because on the plantation, that's the work we did. So it's very relevant that Cross That River is being told to people, because they're confused with Nas, the Compton Cowboys, the Black Federation of Cowboys in New York, which I really herald, and I love what they're trying to do for the community. But they're not cowboys in the sense of what a cowboy is.
Do the songs reflect your own family or ancestral history?
No doubt it does. Coming from a family of Native Americans, ex-slaves, people who went out west, people who were free, yes. I have a family of agrarian lifestyle. People who went to school for music. Everything about my life and about my upbringing is wrapped up in this story. So yeah, it's about my family, definitely.
They say brothers fighting brothers, gonna set those darkies free. Blue was angry, ooh yeah, he was scared, 'cause he knew those old slave owners would soon be coming here.
The music was a slight step away from your standard jazz sound and has a country music flavor. As a matter of fact, the album is subtitled Black Cowboys. Why the change in musical style for this project?
Well, that's why I wrote the story Cross That River. Not just for blacks now, for whites also. And this question reminds me of that. I grew up listening to Brooke Benton, who did Rainy Night in Georgia, Bo Weevil, Nat King Cole, Ramblin' Rose, Herb Jeffries, who I had the pleasure of talking to and getting to know, the Bronze Buckaroo, Flamingo. All these people came from an agrarian lifestyle, and they sang songs that we say now are country. But at the time, they weren't country. They were what black people sang. It was only in the 20s that people who weren't of color decided to take some of these songs and rhythms and make it their own, make a twang out of it. So I really don't feel that I strayed away from my Nat King Cole jazz thing. It's all one, because there was a time where music was one.
Are you working on any new projects right now? Maybe a new album?
past few years, it seems I've been on this hellbound train to tell people about my upbringing. And the more I delve into it, the more I realize that it's pretty good. The next project that I'm doing now, we just recorded it, it's called Kate's Soul Food, and it's my aunt's restaurant down the street from the Apollo, where I used to frequent every Sunday. Take the train from Brooklyn to Harlem and hang out and have dinner. And you would see some of the most greatest purveyors of my genre in jazz and R&B pass through there, getting their food. And as a child, you had to sit there and be quiet before you went to see the show, because on Sundays, matinees, children got in free. So the project is called Kate's Soul Food. It's 10 songs, original material, based upon the rhythms and the grooves of my growing up as a child of color, listening to these songs, from Motown, from jazz to swing to yes to country. So look for it. It'll be out probably January, February of next year. Kate's Soul Food.
Okay, Allan, now it's time for a little bit of fun. This is kind of like my, how can you say, my signature question. So if, Allan, you could be a member of any television sitcom family, which would it be?
That's a weird question, because I grew up watching Flicker, Fury, Good Times, Jeffersons, Archie Bunker, Roy Rogers. I wrote a song, which I'm going to do a bonus track on this, Kate's Soul Food, called Run Through America. And it talks about no more praying, no more singing, trying to empower us that in order for us to get the recognition and the due that 400 years have left us without anything now, except bitterness. This song sings of that. Why am I trying to pair this with the sitcom? Because growing up as a child of color, all you saw were buffoonery. You saw Amos and Andy. You saw Good Times. You know, hey, George. You know, you saw, every time you saw a black person on TV, he was either a comic or he was downplaying his blackness. This song tries to herald that. So it's called Run Through America. But to answer your question, Lynn Mordette, what sitcom would I like to be in? I think it'd be a Western. I'd like to be in Fury or Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers, be a cowboy out on the range, a black cowboy, riding alongside of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, roping and singing and having a good time, because Roy Rogers sang in The Sons of the Pioneers. I'd like to be in that myself. So there's your answer.
Public announcement here. Before we go, I just want to remind everybody to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Rick Henry's Talk Show. Also, take a look at the description of this video for links to Allan Harris's music and website. Allan, I want to thank you with all my heart for joining me today. This is truly an honor to me, as I am a dedicated fan of your music and your beautiful voice. I mean, you really, truly have a beautiful voice. I hope the very best for you in all your musical endeavors and life's journeys. Thank you very much.
Buffalo soldiers, fighting men, rode for the army to clean up the land. Nobody messed with the 9th and the 10th, from the Kansas plains to the Rio Grande.